Amazing. Thank you so much, Chuk. Welcome everybody to today's conversation on systems change in local governments, the SDGs, and other frameworks for change. I am very happy to be calling in today from the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina First Nations, the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, and all others who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. My name is Alex Lidstone. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Executive Director of Climate Caucus, which is a national network of over 470 local government elected officials driving system change to transform our communities in 10 years. So I'm going to give some opening remarks and then I'll introduce our three wonderful panelists. So local governments are often touted as being the level of government most able to respond to climate. However, creating healthy and regenerative cities often requires what I call multi-solving from local governments. This means with every decision, councils have to think about the far-reaching implications like traffic, GHG emissions, social and health outcomes, equitable access to green space, healthy ecosystems, consulting with your local Indigenous communities, and what does that mean and how do we do that? They have to consider the resilience of infrastructure and will it stand up to the 100-year flood, which is now drastically increasing in frequency. These are just some of the questions local councils consider as they make decisions which often impact the land for decades into the future. The next question is, how do councils adequately consider everything when most local governments operate under the current system, which only really accounts for money and the economic impacts? That's where frameworks for system change really come in, and the SDGs are a great example as they integrate the 3 pillars of sustainable development. They have 17 goals and 169 targets, which provide a blueprint for action. Today, I have with me 3 incredible mayors from cities across Canada who are all working towards system change in their own ways. We have Jyoti Gondek, who was sworn in as Calgary's 37th mayor and the first woman to be elected to this role on October 25th, 2021. Prior to being elected mayor, she served as city councillor from 2017 to 2021. She holds a PhD in urban sociology and an MA in organizational sociology. Throughout her career, Mayor Gondek has taken a big picture approach to pressing challenges. Often she has found processes and policies exist simply because they have never been questioned. Mayor Gondek's professional background includes leading the Westman Center for Real Estate Studies at the University of Calgary's Haskayne School of Business, where she examined the challenges facing Calgary's commercial sector as property values in the core plummeted. She knew then that this issue would be a big one for Calgary. She also ran a successful consulting practice for 12 years, helping clients in the energy and city building sectors evolve their business models to fit a changing regulatory and economic environment. Fun fact about Mayor Gondek is that she also taught me sociology way back in the day when I went to University of Calgary, and it was my favorite class, so thank you. Barry Verbranovic was first elected as mayor in the city of Kitchener in 2014, after serving as city councillor from 1994 to 2014. In 2018, Mayor Verbranovic was re-elected for a second term. He is committed to improving the quality of life for residents in Kitchener and throughout the region of Waterloo. As mayor, he serves on all regular standing committees of Kitchener City Council and Region of Waterloo Council. Barry is treasurer of United Cities and Local Governments, president emeritus 2011 to 2012 of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and is a member of FCM's Green Municipal Fund Council. Welcome, Barry. And Michelle Staples was first elected as councillor in the city of Duncan in 2011. After 2 terms on council in 2018, Michelle Staples became the first female mayor for the city of Duncan. Great female mayors in this crowd. She has a deep respect for the First Peoples of this land and is honored to live on Coast Salish territory. Michelle believes that decisions of council must be made keeping in mind that every decision made impacts the land and its resources and leaves a legacy that will affect generations to come. Development must be done in ways that support the highest vision we can create, and council must always be accountable for its decisions and how they affect the lives and well-being of the people we serve. Michelle works as a social planner and has a long history of working in community development with focus areas in climate, reconciliation, and social justice. So welcome everybody to this panel. My first sort of question for everyone is also open for you to give your opening thoughts on the topic. Or you can answer the question of what does system change in local government mean to you? And what kind of opportunities do the SDGs present to advance this and to unlock progress on issues? So I will go to Mayor Gondek first.
Well, thanks very much for the invitation to join you today. It's good to see you again, Alex, and to my colleagues on this call. You've done such amazing work and you're an inspiration to me, just being relatively new in my role. I think it's an interesting conundrum that we find ourselves in as municipalities, trying to move forward the mission of sustainability and taking action on climate change, because sometimes it feels like our resources are limited, and it feels like without proper partnerships with federal and provincial governments, we can't do as much as we want to. But I think the converse is also true. We can act in a very nimble and responsive manner by doing some of the smaller things that are important. And everyone says change starts locally. And I think it's absolutely true that municipalities are a good example of that. So, you know, when I look at the sustainable development goals and I think about which ones directly are linked to cities, number 11 obviously is the one that talks about sustainable cities, but I think we have a big role to play in other areas as well. If you look at number 2 being zero hunger, we could be doing a lot more in terms of urban agriculture and taking action on the food deserts that we have because we don't have proper mixed use in some of our communities. Calgary is a good example. We did not have nearly enough grocery opportunities for people who live downtown. And that's by virtue of the fact that our city was designed around a downtown that was office spaces. When I look at number 8, which is decent work and making sure that people have just economic conditions, we can absolutely do something about that as a corporation by being leaders in benefits-driven procurement and ensuring that people have a proper wage and are taken care of by their employers. And, you know, obviously number 13, climate action. We declared a climate emergency as a brand new council and sent a very clear signal to the world that we understand this and we are committed to taking action. So I think municipalities have sometimes been treated like a final level of government when in fact we are one of 3 orders of government that has a lot of ability to do some really meaningful things. I will turn it over to my colleagues now, and then Alex, I'll wait for your next question.
Great, thank you so much. Mayor Verbranovic.
Thanks a million, Alex. And first of all, I really want to say thank you to my friends at University of Waterloo for the opportunity to join all of you in this great panel. And Alex, to really thank you for the wonderful work you're doing with Canadian cities and communities of all sizes around climate change. You've been a real champion, and I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to thank you publicly for that. You know, when we're talking about systems change in local government, we're really talking about refocusing from our day-to-day service provision for residents and businesses and taking a broader view on things with the impact of municipal decisions on the future, including issues such as climate change, equity, economic prosperity, all while living within the limitations of our planet. I think we recognize that improved quality of life for everyone is possible when we understand that the systems upon which our local governments have been built, and when we seek to influence change at the systems level within those various systems. Being open to the possibility that what these systems have supported is likely unsustainable in many ways, and we need to reflect the extent to which we're open to change, can influence change, and are willing ourselves to change. You know, as Mayor Gondek indicated, municipalities are an incredibly important order of government and one that deliver core services to communities, very much the same services across most, if not all, communities. And so as we start to reflect on that and start looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, it was exactly the reason why, through the work of United Cities and local governments, we worked so hard to have local governments included in the SDGs when they were originally adopted. And in fact, as has been indicated, we really touch on all the goals. And I like to say, in addition to the one about sustainable cities and communities, the one about partnerships really is at the heart of what grassroots local government it's all about. It's about the connections that bring all of us together. As we do our work through the lens of SDGs, as opposed to standalone initiatives, we take a much more holistic view. And that's why we as a city, for example, have included the SDGs in our strategic plan. So when we look at our various goals as an example, something like environmental leadership, we've actually linked it to each of the goals in the SDGs and have taken that lens to our work over the past 4 years of council. And as we embark on a new 20-year strategic plan during 2022. I think the pandemic has exposed many gaps for low-income and essential workers, and the SDGs really helps bring some of those issues to the forefront. There's a great deal of work that's been done on how we can localize them within municipalities. Back in 2019, UCLG created the Gold 5 report, which was around the localization of the global agendas. And so I encourage people to visit uclg.org. And FCM is a big part of UCLG's global work to, in fact, look at how we can become more engaged amongst cities across Canada in this work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mayor Staples.
Thank you. And today I'd like to acknowledge that I'm calling in from the territory of the Quetzin First Nation. And I'd also like to echo my thanks to Alex for inviting me onto this panel and for everything that you do, bringing our communities together across Canada in really important discussions and helping us work together in ways that, we haven't always traditionally done. And I just really want to echo what has been said, Alex. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And in terms of the SDGs, it's been really interesting. I think that the pandemic has really provided us, on a global scale, the ability and opportunity to actually recognize the connections in between these, because we're almost forced to do so. I think that that's one of the sort of values of what has happened over the past 2 years. These are, when I look at the SDGs and how we can implement them within local government, it always sort of strikes me when I first came onto local government. One of the first conversations I had at the table, I was a single mother at the time, and one of the first conversations that I had at the table was in a session we were talking about affordable housing. And someone said, well, you have to decide, the facilitator said, you have to decide what types of people do you want in your community? And that's where the discussion began. And I said, well, are you talking about people like me? Because if we don't have affordable housing, I certainly have no place here. And yet here I am at this table. And I feel like that's always been a challenge at local government and in really in all levels of government, is recognizing that we're all part of this intricate spider web. And we can either be the spider or we can be the fly that's trapped in the web. And I think what these do is they really allow us, these development goals, to recognize that every part of that web, every strand, exists to give that web the strength that it needs to succeed. It gives, if one of them is broken, then we lose that foundation, we lose that strength. And then what happens is people start to become either completely missing from it or they become trapped within it. And so when I look at local government and the experiences that we've had over these past 2 years and our ability to come together and to actually be put in a position where we have to look at what's missing in order to address what's going wrong in our community, where we're losing, where those gaps are, and where people are trapped, and where we ourselves are. I really feel that we have that ability to recognize it as we're weaving this kind of new way forward from here, that these goals should ultimately be the foundation of everything that we do. But in order to ensure that they're implemented in a way at all of our tables and in our communities, we have to recognize that these are things that at local government we are responsible for in the very nature of all the decisions we make, because we are the first level of government. but we also have to be part of that broader picture with provincial and federal governments in order to have, you know, the parts of the web in place that we need in order to be successful. And so, yeah, I just really believe that we have such opportunities now. And I really believe that we have to not lose our connection that we have started in the past 2 years, because I do feel like that is we are starting to drop a lot of those pieces. So how do we pick them up?
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Very different answers from all of you, but I have heard from each of you the importance of municipalities and local governments in this work. And it's interesting how you're all weaving the SDGs into your work in your various cities in very different ways and from different perspectives, but it's working great for all of you. So that's lovely. And I also just quickly wanted to remind the audience that we do have some time for audience Q&A at the end of this. So please throw your questions into the chat and we can get to them with the panelists in the last few minutes. So moving on to our second question, I always say that in local governments, councils are always trying to multi-solve. So for example, approving a development isn't really just approving a development. You also are trying to consider what are the greenhouse gas implications? What are the social justice implications? Is there low-income housing involved? Is there a good way for people to get in and out of this development? Is this going to cause extra congestion? All of these sorts of things. So I am wondering, how can systems thinking and systems change help you multi-solve better? I will go to Mayor Gondek to start. Thank you.
I think one of the biggest things we have to do is get over this idea of linear thinking. And I guess it's kind of easy for me to say I'm not a linear thinker. I don't believe that things happen as, you do step one, then you get step two, and then you'll get to the outcome. I've never been like that. I have this, I guess the way my mind works is that there's a series of, nodes or blobs or whatever you want to call them. And I pull things in as I need to solve the problems that need to be solved. And I have no problem with that. But I can tell you my husband, who's an engineer, does not think like that and finds it quite strange that I do. So I think we have to understand that our ways of thinking are different from each other. And so as decision makers on a local council, sometimes that's the thing that's holding us back, is this ability to really understand that when it comes to problem solving, there's no easy answer, and there's multiple ways that we have to go about it, and striking the partnerships that we need. And so I think if we build a foundation that focuses on resilience of the city, and resilience being making sure that our environment, our society, and our economy are all things that we are focused on at the same time, we start to make better decisions that consider all three of those things. And that's what we're trying to do as a council right now in our strategic planning exercise. But it wasn't typically like that. Our strategic planning used to consist of reviewing a budget and looking at business units and figuring out if we had allocated enough money to them. There wasn't a lot of strategic direction, and there wasn't a lot of unpacking of the wicked problems that we have before us. And I think now, as we are getting more and more people that have different lived experiences and different passions for why they ran, we are starting to approach some of those things. And so I think if we're trying to be systems focused and nimble, we have to break down the policies that prevent us from being that way. I'll give you one very quick example of our downtown. It used to be basically a single-use downtown. It was offices. And if you ever wanted to change that and you wanted to put in, a dentist's office or, a pet care facility, you would have to go through this cumbersome process of applying for land use change. And you would never get approval because you had to have minimum parking accompanying it, which makes no sense because you can't create new parking for a new use. So we ended up having Tom Mahler, really, really smart guy in administration, come up with something called the Center City Enterprise District. So now you can fast track applications like that. So you can actually go to the lab and get your blood work done, pick up your dry cleaning, and pick up your kids from childcare in the same building. That is not how we used to think. So I believe that being more sociological and understanding that cities are the intersection of people and places and those things that they value might move us further. But we've been stuck in this mindset of The streets have to get cleared, the water has to turn on, and that's what we're responsible for. We are responsible for much more than that. It's just this jurisdictional mind shift that we have to get to.
Yeah, super interesting. Thank you so much, Mayor Gondek. Mayor Verbranovic.
Thanks, Alex. And just, building on Mayor Gondek's last point there, I mean, I think it is so true that as cities, we got to get beyond those traditional services. And in fact, I think the pandemic has really demonstrated how we are truly the order of government that's closest to citizens and that's so important in terms of their day-to-day lives. But, when you start thinking about system change, I really want to go back to a quote from Leonardo da Vinci, who said, "Learn how to see, realize that everything connects to everything else." And I think when we're talking about cities and talking about the SDGs, it really is about that connectivity, that integration and collaboration that is so key as not only how we plan our communities, but how we deliver the services that we're responsible for and that our communities are looking to us for. As a city, I referenced that we built the SDGs into the last 4 years of our current strategic plan, and we'll now really use them as the foundation of our next 20-year vision. And I think it's important because it allows us to develop both a long and short-term perspective that then becomes embedded within the organization, where we can have both a long-term and a short-term perspective, and through the process, equip our leadership team to work across departments on issues, emerge and engage rather with the full diversity of our community, our council, aligning budgets, corporate performance, and organizational development going forward. I think having overarching goals like the SDGs assist us in creating that organizational alignment and breaking down some of the traditional silos that existed in order to tackle each of these goals, which have cross-cutting connectivity between each other as we work forward. And I really want to give you just two very quick examples of how we've been able to apply that in the community. As we've tackled climate action in Waterloo Region, we've worked both with NGOs as well as local governments at both the lower and the upper tier of local government. So Green Solutions and Sustainable Waterloo Region have led our local climate action efforts together with the 7 local municipalities and our regional government to now create our second community climate action plan called Transform Waterloo Region. And this has been a successful decade-long collaboration and something that is guiding our work as we work to meet the commitments that Canada has made and that we've all made in regards to the Paris Agreement. And then secondly, as I said, I mean, the pandemic has been a perfect example of where we've had to work through different orders of government, different departments and so on, to really rethink how we delivered services in order to make sure that our communities can continue to thrive despite the challenges of the last 2 years and COVID-19.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Mayor Staples, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'll build off of the examples that are being shared. And one of the examples that we went through as a community during the pandemic, as many communities in Canada, we have been dealing with a housing crisis around, particularly with the homelessness. And that, as we know, impacts everyone in our community. It impacts, when you look at the social development goals, every single one of those goals has a part to play in addressing this challenge that we all face. And one of the things that we were able to do was to break down all of the silos of different levels of government and really work with system change thinking, again, in action, to be able to come up with a plan, working with nonprofits, service providers, working with different levels of local government, working with Cowichan tribes, working with the provincial and federal governments, and come up with a plan that we were able to put into action very quickly. From the time we had the plan developed within a week of the onset of the pandemic, and we had 117 people housed in our region within 2.5 months. And, that this is something that we hadn't been able to do prior to the pandemic, because of the lack of everyone being able to recognize that we all needed to work together on this, and having those barriers broken down so that we could. And now that we have experienced that and moved through that, it's getting people to hold on to the idea and the experience that when we do this, it actually works. When we do this, we can actually make significant change really quickly, and then we can build on what we've learned. We can build on, the challenges. We can build and continue to grow. But we had to really work within those without and outside of those boundaries that we put in place and that are often in place for local government.
Wonderful, thank you. It's interesting to me how all three of you just discussed different ways of problem solving and planning, which integrate sort of new ways of thinking and the sustainable development goals ultimately, and talking with new people and thinking, I guess, outside of your traditional ways of planning as a local government. So it's neat to see how it's working in different places. My third question is, one of the barriers to systems change in all governments is that work tends to be done in silos, which is something that I think quite a few of you have mentioned already. Do you have any advice on how to break these down and work across silos in local government? I'll go to Mayor Gondek again to start, if that's okay.
I think you have to be persistent. Municipal governments, like any other government, are a big machine, and it's hard to change an institution that's this big and has been mired in this kind of thinking for so long. I'll be honest with you, we've undergone a change in the 4 years that I served on council previously. There was this shift from talking about business units to talking about service lines. And it was good. We moved a little bit, but we're still stuck in service lines and we're not looking at the big picture. So I think as decision makers, as people who are setting strategic direction, and as governors, if you will, I think it's important for us to continually remind people of how they fit together. So I am regularly, when we're talking about planning, saying, why is transportation infrastructure a different department than community planning? Because what we're ending up with are oversized roads based on network demand rather than a properly planned community that is interested in the needs of the people who live there. And I'll give you a very tangible example. In Calgary, in the north part of Calgary where I live, there is the ring road, Stony Trail. It's massive. You can whip along there however fast you want to go. There are speed limits, but rarely are they followed. But it's 6 lanes. And immediately to the north, in the middle of one of the most complete communities you can imagine in our city, the transportation infrastructure team wanted to put in 6 more lanes, to which I said, that makes 0 sense. From an economic perspective, this is developable land. From an environmental perspective, why are we wasting this land? And, from a social perspective, this is not safe or any sense of community for people. And so we managed to get it whittled down, and we managed to get a bus route and dedicated mobility corridor there. But again, it's this separation of who's doing what and for what purpose. So I really hope that if we can focus on resilience and those 3 pillars, what does this do for the environment? What does it do for society? What does it do for the economy? Maybe we can be better at setting some direction, but it's hard to do. And, I hate to say this, sometimes we also exist in institutions that reward time that you've spent here. And so you tend to give promotions to people who have been here longer. And I think it's that, tenure-based promotion model rather than merit-based that has us stuck in some of that siloed and old way of thinking. So it's going to be really tough to change these institutions that have such deeply ingrained thoughts, but it is possible. And I think a lot of it happens when you start giving a bit more room and permission space to the people who are newer and younger to the organization, not necessarily age-wise, but people that are coming in with fresh eyes. And you give them the opportunity to point out things that could and should be different. And, I see in the chat, somebody mentioned, how do you do good work when the vote bank is a big impediment? Absolutely. We always have counselors that are worried about, I'm going to vote in this way and then will I get reelected? We've got to keep convincing our colleagues that reelection is not what you're here for. You're here to serve for 4 years and do some good work. So, the politics of the politics is a problem, but changing thinking will take time. We have to be persistent and patient.
Great. Thank you so much. Some really great thoughts there. Mayor Verbranovich.
Thanks, Alex. And I'm going to build on Mayor Gondek's comments and go back, in fact, to an old friend of mine that's near and dear to the University of Waterloo, and that's former President David Johnson, who also happened to be our former Governor General. And one of the things that David often talked about was the barn-raising spirit that exists here in Waterloo Region that's often synonymous with our Mennonite community, and how community comes together after barn burns down to really see everybody working collaboratively, breaking down traditional silos in order to get the barn rebuilt and repurposed as quickly as possible. And I think that's really what our role as civic leaders are. Unlike in the United States and many other jurisdictions, we don't have an executive branch in Canadian local government. We don't have a strong mayor system. And so, whether we're talking about, Jyoti, Michelle, or myself in terms of how we break down these silos, it really boils down to building an environment of collaboration and consensus building amongst the council in order to do that, and in order to tackle the challenges. This whole vote bank piece is a reality out there, and it's getting councillors to come to appreciate that, in fact, long-term thinking is what residents really look towards and reward. Both Calgary and Kitchener have shared a former CAO, Jeff Fielding, and Jeff, in fact, helped create an economic development investment fund in the city of Kitchener many years ago, and it required council to think beyond 4 years and to think in a 10-year cycle. And in fact, we've now created a new one, which is for a new 10-year cycle. And this council today felt courage to embrace it because of the work that was done previously. But it was developing that culture in the organization, and quite frankly, developing the right team on your administrative side in order to help build that culture within the organization and see change happen.
Great, thank you so much. And Mayor Staples.
Oh, there's just so many examples. I just was on phone calls this morning about some of the pieces that are missing around places that normally aren't part of local government or just aren't part of our purview, particularly at regional districts where our EOC is situated, and looking at how do we, moving forward, ensure that we are connecting with those other service providers that we need to call upon in an emergency, so that they're part of that government structure as well going forward. So one of the things I notice happens is that there's a level of output that we all have, and this term has been remarkable with the level of output we've needed to have during a pandemic. And what often happens is, after these events, we're all coming together to build the barn, and then afterwards we're all, people kind of drift off and they're exhausted or different things happen, but we don't take that time to make sure that we're rebuilding stronger for that next, whatever that next thing is, right? And I think that's where a lot of the momentum gets lost, and also the continuity of people. I'm not sure what's happening in other places, but one of the things happening here is that there are a lot of people retiring. There's people moving. There's been a massive shift in local governments in terms of staffing, and also just within organizations. So 6-8 months ago, a lot of the faces that were part of this big push with COVID response, the majority of them aren't here anymore. And so how do we continue to build that level of commitment and connection to make sure that we're prepared for what comes next, and that we're working together still, who is that person that holds that thread that's always making sure that we're coming back together? And so I feel like that is one of the biggest challenges that we have with silos, is just capacity. Who is going to continue to do that? And continuity, consistency, those things really need to be somehow embedded into what we do.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, the great retirement or whatever people are calling it, I've been hearing about it in a lot of local governments and a lot of other areas of work across the country. All right, my next question is sort of very relevant to this conference, Together Ensemble. So it's about coming together. I know a lot of you have spoken about the importance of working with your province and with the federal government, but there's also the importance of working with your community and the community involvement in your work, advancing the SDGs. So I'm wondering, what is the best way that a community member can get involved with the local government and the work that you're doing? Maybe we'll go to Mayor Gondek again first.
Oh, not fair. I'm on the hot seat first every time. One thing that we've been doing since I got elected is hosting roundtables. And these roundtables focus on different sectors. And so we've had arts and culture, tech sector, real estate, energy, social services, women in different enterprises. So as I've sat and talked to all of these different folks in these roundtables, I've realized that they need to connect with each other too. And that, as much as we talk about breaking down silos within our governments, we also need to break down the silos of which sector speaks with whom and at what time. A really good example is the arts and culture folks, a lot of them that are running theater companies and galleries, didn't realize that the measure of performance by which funding is sometimes awarded is through room nights being measured by hotels. And so, if the stronger the room nights calculation, the better able you are to tap into funds. Well, they didn't know that. So they weren't reporting on room nights impacted by their events. And so now they know that. Now they're going to try to integrate what they're doing with how things get measured and try to influence some change there. But the more I listen to people in the community, the more I hear, we don't feel like we're connected to people outside of our sector, and we really don't feel like we're connected to local government and how do we influence decision making. There is a bit of a question about whether our engagement process is actually engagement or is it just pushing out information? And sometimes it is. It's information and it's not truly shaping ideas with the public. So the thing with the roundtables is I can now bring these ideas forward to my council colleagues and we can figure out better ways to get people involved who are interested in bringing about some meaningful change. So I think that's one direction. The other thing is our community associations and the level of strength that they have. In a city of Calgary, we've got established areas and then newer areas. The community associations within established areas tended to be very strong back in the day because they were funded and they received support to have a community facility, and that's where people would gather. Now in our newer areas, that funding is gone. So our community associations have been replaced by residents associations or homeowners associations. And the two of them are at odds because one is saying we truly represent the people and the other one only represents the developer. Not really. It's always people who are coming forward with their concerns and their needs. So once again, the systems and the policies that we have in place are absolute barriers to how people can actually have a voice. So I think we've got to do a lot more just opening up the doors and having people come in and talk to us rather than trying to go through some formal structure. And I will give you one last example here. We held a series of hearings on trying to become an anti-racist city back in 2020. And what we should have done is realize that people would come and talk to us about their experiences with racism and be incredibly traumatized. They would live through their crises again. It wasn't looked at that way. It was shaped like a regular public hearing. Well, in a regular public hearing, you get 5 minutes to speak, you can't ask questions, and then you have to go sit down. It was awful. It was tragic listening to people. We didn't have counseling services there. We missed the boat on how we should have done this. Our intention was pure, but our system made us do it in a way that was not sensitive to people's needs. So once again, I think we have to sometimes just put away the policies and procedures and be human beings and invite people in for a conversation. And to my other two colleagues' points, it's been really tough with the pandemic. really tough, but this kind of a virtual setting has also allowed us to engage with many more people than we used to. Thanks.
Wonderful. Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for your thoughts, Mayor Gondek. Mayor Verbranovich.
Thanks, Alex. And I think that is so true. The last 2 years have been very challenging, but there's been some positive stuff that has come out of it that I actually think is going to last. So, for example, the notion of now allowing delegations to appear virtually, which means older adults, young families that otherwise would maybe have had to look for childcare in the evening and so on, are all going to be likely in many cities be able to continue to be engaged in the future by either appearing live in a council chamber or appearing virtually. And that I think is a positive that has come out of it, and that'll actually improve engagement in local government overall. But there are so many opportunities to being involved, whether it's our council advisory committees in our cities, getting involved in our online and public information meetings and so on, where there's an opportunity for people to engage. One of the things that Jeff did when he was our CAO here was help us create actually a citizen advisory committee focused around our strategic plan. It's called Compass Kitchener, and it does two things. It helps guide our strategic planning process in each of its 4-year increments, and now the new 20-year update. But more importantly, each term, it actually evaluates how council and the administration are doing against delivering on those goals. And it's something that's pretty unique, and I'll admit is a little bit risky, because you're taking this group of citizens that are on the committee and allowing them to say, hey, tell me what my report card is and how have I done? And I will tell you, there was a lot of nervousness when we first did it, and it's been in place now for, I think, 16, 17 years. And it's one of the best things we did, and it's never created a problem for council thus far, knock on wood, because the people there are so passionate about our community. So I think that's important. It's important about obviously making sure that we hear from diverse audiences, and we're creating an equitable environment for engagement, which always hasn't been the case, and something that as municipalities we're much more focused on now. And lastly, one of the things that we've done here a number of years ago, when I first became mayor, was we created a neighborhood strategy called Love My Hood. And out of that came a neighborhood development office that now works with neighborhoods and communities throughout the city in terms of really looking at what are their strengths as a community, developing activities and facilities that support them, and looking at how we can build connections between them in order to tackle some of this. And all of this obviously aligns with the SDGs going forward.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for that. And Mayor Staples.
Thank you. Yeah, getting the community involved. We had COVID response funds that we had, and it was really interesting to see some of the projects that came through. They were all really about connecting people in neighborhoods during COVID. A lot of the funding requests, creating spaces for people to gather, and a lot of that we're going to leave in the city and continue to expand on. And I think that that's been again one of the gifts that we can take from this. I think other ways to encourage community involvement is around the language that we use, trying to share all of this with people. And I think that's a really important thing, is having, first of all, just going and meeting people. We're lucky we're in a small city. We're the smallest city in Canada. And so I can literally go out and walk. I walk in different sections of the city and meet and talk to people, as is my council, all the time. We're also the hub of a broader community, right? So we're the center of a much broader population. But one of the things I think is that, and I hear this a lot from people, is around the language that's used in all forms of government. How do you connect and talk to people without? I'm always struggling with this, without sounding like a politician. It's listening, listening and really authentically and going, okay, so here's how and why this exists the way that it does, but not trying to change it so that it's not a barrier for people to want to feel like they're involved or be able to be involved. I think that's always a really, kind of sticky place to be in, but just to continue to work on that, on how we language and communication. I think one of the biggest struggles we all have. It is so easy and so fast for miscommunication to happen in the era of social media, for stories to take off, for rumors to explode. And none of us possibly has the time, energy, capacity. We would be doing nothing else if all we did was respond to it. And so really creating, how do we create opportunities for people to just to sort of be that voice of, here's this thing that's happening, but when we're talking about complexity, this isn't all of the story. This is just a piece of the story, and we need to talk about the whole story, and engaging people constantly in dialogues around that, and without losing them. And like you were saying, Mayor Gondek, earlier, about you and your husband, and the two different lenses that you see the world, and recognizing that when we're speaking to people and asking them to become involved, that the way that we talk about this, the way that we talk about complexity, specifically, it can be alienating for some people. And so how do we make those connections to really just say, everything that you're doing is amazing, and we need you to do that piece. If your piece is going out in your neighborhood and planting your garden, having chickens, whatever your piece is, if it's going on cleanup crews, if it's every single one of those things, helps make all of this, all of us connect to each other. And so I think it's just really encouraging the way that we speak, and encouraging people to do what they can from where they are, and that we are, I love the barn raising. We're constantly doing that as communities, addressing every single challenge. Like, how do we come together, and what things can we bring to build that barn back? And so that's where I really believe we can continue to always do better at that engagement process, and inviting people in.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's interesting. You all sort of spoke about breaking down barriers and also empowering your community to make sure that they feel that they have a voice and that they have a say in what's going on, and that they understand how important their role is, which is really great. So we have one final question, although we are at sort of 10 minutes to the end of the hour. So we're going to audience questions after this. There aren't too many, and some of them have more or less been answered, I think, already in our comments, which is good. So I'm not going to stress about time, but I will ask you my final question, which is, what do you think are the top 2 or 3 things that local governments can do to better use a systems approach that better supports the sustainable development goals? You can also use this time to sort of give your closing thoughts. And if you have any comments on what any of the other panelists have said, we would love to hear about that as well. And I will start with Mayor Verbranovich this time.
I got to blame Mayor Gondek for this, for pitching the ball to me first. But thank you for that. And I think there's a number of things that we can do. I'll start off first of all by one that I already referenced, and that's about really building a strong team within our organization. Obviously as a council, we're responsible for one hire, and that's the CAO. But we have the opportunity through that role to influence the kind of organization we want to build from a policy point of view, and the kind of culture we want to build. And so thinking systemically and building that kind of team is so key. Secondly, use the resources that are available to you. I referenced earlier UCLG, which is United Cities and Local Governments, the global equivalent of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. They have done immense work both on getting cities included in the SDGs back in 2015. And in all the work every year at the high-level political forum at the UN since then. It's a wonderful resource, lots of online resources. FCM has some as well. FCM's done a lot of great work around this. And I'd be remiss here if I didn't thank and acknowledge current Minister Karina Gold, who in fact was the former Minister for International Development and now is responsible, as you know, for families, children, and social development. She has an SDG secretariat within her department that actually can work with municipalities and support them in this work. And also, reach out to folks like Bob Ray, our ambassador at the United Nations. His team at the mission in New York does a lot of work and engages with cities like us on this. And the last thing that you can do, and be shameless about it, if you see other great ideas that cities have, steal them. Give them credit for it, but don't be humble and think that you need to always reinvent the wheel. Use those other ideas and let's together create a whole, book of them that we can then, in fact, share and make great communities across Canada and around the world.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, at Climate Caucus, we always joke about how no city ever wants to be first, but they also don't want to be last. So a lot of our councillors will say to their staff, don't worry, we're not leading on this. Someone else has already done it. And then their staff will be willing to take it on. I'll go to Mayor Gondek next.
I loved all of those comments. I particularly love the one about if something's working somewhere else, just use it, right? I mean, I think we worry too much about, I always hear, we need a Calgary-based solution. No, you don't. You need something that works. And it could have been, Kitchener-based or Duncan-based, and we can transport it here. It's okay to do that. I think a couple of things. We need to be unafraid to talk about these goals. And I think sometimes we get trapped in that ideological conversation about, oh, will it make me look too progressive? Oh, what will the Conservative government say if we're talking about, sustainable development goals? And let's just not be afraid to talk about the things we need to talk about. So let's make sure that the goals are integrated into our decision-making, our vernacular, and let's be unafraid to talk about the issues. I mean, my goodness, did we really need to go through 3 days of public hearing to say, yeah, racism is still a thing? Probably not, but we did. And now we're still struggling with, explaining to people what systemic racism means. It means that the systems we have are rooted in some pretty racist philosophies and practices. It doesn't mean that everyone in that system is a racist. Like it is just such a difficult conversation to have some days with people. Let's talk about the fact that gender bias still exists and that there are barriers for women to participate equally in the labor force. Let's be unafraid to talk about that. I'll tell you something else about gender that I think has woken me up, at least. During the pandemic, as we were doing all of our public hearings online and people were phoning into the phone bridge, I couldn't tell if a person was male or female. So I didn't know whether I should say Mr. or Ms. Frankly, I shouldn't have had to say any of them. I could probably use first name or just use the whole name. And it made me clue in how I had this unconscious bias of needing to use this title that would perhaps misgender somebody. So, wake up call for me there. But we can't be afraid to talk about the things that are real and are causing us a lot of strife in our communities. Once again, I go back to this idea of, don't be worried about staying in your own lane, because we can't. I mean, we are in a particularly interesting environment right now where our provincial government wants to open up the Municipal Government Act and remove some of our abilities. They want to remove our ability to impact positively public health and public safety. That's frightening. Like, what's next? Because really, I mean, if we push the envelope on this, they'll just get rid of local governments. And then what will you be left with? You will be left with no representation at the local level. We must be unafraid. We must push for the things we need. And we have to own our power as a local government. Like, let's make sure we are recognized as a premier order of government and not just the third level, the way that we get portrayed. So I would say, be unafraid and own your power.
Great. Thank you so much, Mayor Gondek. Those are great. And Mayor Staples.
Thank you for that. You just actually helped me learn something too that I hadn't realized I was holding on to a bias, and I really appreciate that. It's amazing, those little things, right? One person says something and all of a sudden it wakes up another and so on. And that's, I think, how we move through all of this together, is by continuing to have those conversations. I love what you said about being unafraid. I have this, one of we say, damn right I did it. It's like, yeah, and I'm going to be proud of it. And I'm sorry that it may not be something that you feel that we should be doing in a local government, or that it's what you want to do, but we have to do something. And so I am not going to stand behind just doing nothing because of being afraid. And I think that that's something that we all need to do more of. And I do see a lot of people out there. I'm blessed with a phenomenal council I just cannot believe the people that I've been able to sit at the table with this year. And we're from such different sort of ages, different political spectrums, and the way that everyone works together with humility, with compassion, with being open to learning and listening. It's just incredible. And standing behind those really hard choices that are not popular, it's just such an important important piece of this. And I think that to just add a couple of things, we need to bring the people power together to do this from everywhere. We need to just continue to mobilize people to come together, and not in a way that's defiant. One of the things that I really, really learned, how you sit with those things and you think about them, and then one day you recognize something you didn't see before. When I was first elected as mayor, I was in a conversation with some people, and I really believe that we were there to work together, that we were showing up with a shared purpose, with a shared vision, with a shared goal of making things better in our community. And what I didn't recognize is that for 2 years actually was that's not how we were showing up. We were showing up in very different ways. And that has helped me kind of understand this great need to really look at, how we continue to develop the people power. And when we ask people to come and do something and be part of the solution, it doesn't mean opposing what your mayor and council are doing. It means actually we're not all going to be happy with the outcomes of this. We're just not. There's going to be things that we all have to compromise, that we all have to let go and that we all have to let go of to do what's best for the community. And that's how we have to show up for those discussions, not wanting to win or lose. And we have to be, unafraid, as you say, Mayor Gondek, to stand in those decisions and to stand together and figure out what's best for our community at this time. And it cannot be a competition, and it cannot be a fight to see who wins or loses. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mayor Staples. I have one question from the audience, which I'll ask really quickly because we have less than a minute. So in point form, Mayor Vibranovich, if you want to answer this, how can youth engage in municipalities on climate and social action? And what can help you as a city councillor push forward youth priorities?
You know what? Reach out to your municipality, participate in an advisory council, a youth advisory council if it exists, or encourage the creation of one. We work with our school boards on programming in grade 5 and 10 when civics is on the agenda, and advocate. Quite frankly, the last 2 years have shown us we need to advocate for more civics programs in the educational system as young people are growing up.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mayor Vibranovich. That's great. And thank you so much to the other panelists on the call.
Can I answer that one quickly? Sorry, I'm the one that's supposed to leave. We need to stop talking at youth. We need to stop telling them what we think they should be doing and actually start asking them what it is that they're missing. And once again, this type of Zoom setting is the type of thing we should take advantage of. You can catch youth in the middle of the million things they're doing in their life if you just interact with them like this. And so we need to stop telling youth that you should do this and start asking them about what they want to do, because we don't know best. They're the ones that'll tell us what the future of our city looks like. Thanks for letting me barge in there.
No worries. Thank you so much, Mayor Gondek. I appreciate that a lot. Yeah, I'm going to have to wrap it up now because we're at the top of the hour, but I would love to thank the panelists. It was a really great conversation. Mayor Staples would also like to add that youth councils are really important. So youth are great. If you're a youth, make sure that you get involved in your local government. There's lots of ways to do it, and it's really, really important. And I will pass things back over to Chuk. So thank you again for everybody for listening, and thank you to the wonderful panelists.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Merci énormément Alex. Merci beaucoup à la mairesse Gondek, mairesse Staples et maire Vibranovich. It was a pleasure listening to all of you. It's always really interesting because I think oftentimes when we have these discussions, we do forget about municipalities, right? We have a habit of being like, we call upon the federal government to do X, Y, Z. Our province is not doing enough, but how often do we talk about our cities? And so this was an incredibly wonderful conversation to really sort of bring that to the forefront of our discussions and to have us recognize the importance of our municipalities. And there are many themes that kept on sort of recurring throughout this conversation. The importance of breaking down silos, working across silos, this whole idea of once again, together ensemble. But then also that recognition that it's hard to change the institutions that we have. It's difficult to change the systems that we have. That does not mean we should not do it, but that we have to recognize going in how difficult it is going to be. There was talk about the 3 pillars of environment, society, and economy. And I'm going to actually add to that and say we have to be able to recognize that our 3 pillars are lacking, right? If we're able to meet the 3 pillars, environment, society, and economy, we have 2 pillars, economy and society, that tend to very much sort of center what's currently going on in the present, and environment that centers the future. And so even when recognizing the 3 pillars appropriately, we tend to make an overbalance to favor the present while causing detriment to the future. So something for us to think about as we sort of continue these conversations that we're having. We speak to the continuity of people. How do we continue to build when there's always a change of people, a change of that contact person, especially when you break down silos. When silos are broken down, you tend to have a go-to person. What happens when that go-to person is no longer there? And to sort of end this little sort of wrap-up session, listening to our mayor speaking made me think about this story that came out of Finland. So in Finland, they put a very high sort of priority on gender parity. And there was this one discussion that they had, sur le déneigement. And I know I'm switching into French right now, but I don't know how to say déneigement in English. So, ils ont parlé de la déneigement des trottoirs.
They talked about snow removal on sidewalks.
Ils
And
ont
when
dit,
they talked about that, they said,
c'est quelque chose que les
well,
hommes et les
this
femmes
is
vont faire
something
semblablement, le
that
déneigement. Et en
will
effet,
just
les femmes
happen.
étaient comme non.
But women
On a une approche
said,
différente.
no,
Donc,
we have a different approach.
avant
So
la parité de genre sur cette conseil qui gérait le
before
déneigement, souvent les hommes avaient l'habitude de déneiger la
thinking
rue
about this issue,
avant de déneiger les
generally
trottoirs.
men
C'était juste
would
l'habitude.
remove the snow from
Mais
the
quand
road
les
before
femmes ont
moving on
pris
to the
charge
sidewalk.
de
But
cette
when
décision-là,
the file
ils
was
ont
handed over
suggéré
to
de
the women, they
déneiger les
suggested
trottoirs
that
avant de
we remove
déneiger la
snow
rue
on the
parce
sidewalks
qu'elles
before
avaient
we
comme
remove the snow
l'expérience
from the roads,
vécue
because
de
they
marcher
had
sur
a
le
lived
trottoir beaucoup plus que
experience
les hommes parce que
based
avec le
on
rôle de
the
genre
fact
dans la
that they walked
société-là,
more given their
c'était
roles in
souvent les
society,
femmes
and
qui
they
marchaient
felt
avec les enfants.
that the
C'était souvent les
sidewalks
femmes
needed to be cleared
qui utilisaient les
first.
trottoirs beaucoup plus que
They
les
felt that
autres.
women
Et
and
ils ont
children
trouvé, après
used the
cette
sidewalks
année-là,
more. And
qu'il y avait
after
une grosse
that analysis,
réduction
they
du nombre
noticed
de
that
gens
there
qui
was
sont tombés
a
et qui
reduced
avaient
number
besoin d'aller à
of slips
l'hôpital
and
en raison de
falls,
tomber de la
and
neige.
therefore fewer admissions
Et
to
donc, ça, c'est
hospital.
un bon
So
rappel à
that
l'importance
is really
d'avoir plusieurs
important.
personnes à la table
It
quand on fait
means
des
that you
discussions
need a
et
lot of
d'avoir comme des
people around the
discussions
table
ouvertes
to
qui invitent
take
l'ensemble de la population
decisions that
à
invite
poser des
everybody
questions,
to
à
contribute
offrir leur
their
expérience
opinion and their
vécue,
experience.
expérience intérieure sur le
The
travail et les
result will be better.
connaissances. Donc, merci
So
énormément
thank
à
you
tout le
very
monde.
much to everybody.
And now we're going to take a moment to transition to our last session of the day, which is an award ceremony that is being hosted by the Alberta Council for Global Cooperation. And so we'll be celebrating the winners of the SDG Youth Awards.